October 14th, 1944. Noon. A dark green car with Berlin plates pulls up to a villa in Herrlingen, and two German generals step out carrying a cyanide capsule and written orders from Adolf Hitler. The house is already surrounded by SS men in civilian clothes hiding in the woods with orders to storm the building and shoot everyone inside if there's any resistance. The generals enter the study of Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, the most famous general in the German army, and ask his wife and 15-year-old son to leave the room. Then they lock the door and present the mathematics of his death. Option 1. You face the People's Court, where you'll be screamed at by Judge Roland Fraser, stripped of your rank and executed, not by firing squad, because that's too honorable, but by hanging from a meat hook with piano wire, slow strangulation over 20 minutes while a camera crew films your death for Hitler to watch in his private theater. Your wife sent to a concentration camp. Your son conscripted into a penal battalion to die on the Eastern Front. Your name erased from history. Option 2. You swallow this capsule right now. Your heart stops in seconds. The regime announces you died of complications from your war injuries. You get a state funeral with full honors, your pension guaranteed, your wife untouched, your son safe. Rommel looks at the generals and asks for a few minutes to say goodbye. He goes upstairs and tells his son, "I shall be dead in 15 minutes." At 1 o'clock, he puts on his Afrika Korps leather jacket, picks up his field marshal's baton, and walks to the car. The car drives about 200 yards down the road and stops. He swallows the cyanide. By 1:15, the Desert Fox is dead. 4 days later, Hitler sends a massive wreath to the funeral, and the entire nation mourns. It was all a lie. Most people think this story is about Hitler's paranoia, about a dictator murdering his most popular general out of fear. That misses the real story. Erwin Rommel didn't die because Hitler was paranoid. He died because Rommel made a catastrophic strategic error in the months before. He talked to conspirators but didn't join them, wanted the regime to fall but wouldn't push it, occupied the halfway position, known to be disloyal but not committed enough to succeed. This is why halfway resistance is fatal. If you're interested in the strategic calculations that shaped history, not just the battles, but the decisions made in back rooms, hit subscribe, because this channel dissects the systems behind the events. To understand why Rommel was in that car with cyanide, we need to go back 3 months, because the irony is, Rommel shouldn't have been alive in October at all. July 17th, 1944. 3 days before the plot to kill Hitler. Rommel is in his open-top staff car speeding through Normandy, trying to rally the collapsing German defenses. An Allied Spitfire pilot spots the dust trail, dives, and opens fire with cannons. The driver is hit, the car spins out of control and flips. Rommel is thrown onto the pavement, 4 skull fractures, shattered cheekbone, unconscious. He's rushed to a hospital barely clinging to life. Now pause and look at the timing. If the strafing run had been slightly more accurate, Rommel dies right there on the road as a hero of the Reich, dies fighting the Allies, gets a state funeral, and history remembers him as the loyal general who fell in battle. But he survives, and that survival is his tragedy. Because 3 days later, while Rommel is hospitalized with severe head injuries, Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg walks into Hitler's headquarters with a briefcase bomb. The bomb explodes, Hitler survives, the coup fails. The Gestapo launches the most brutal investigation in Third Reich history, 7,000 arrests, 5,000 executions. And as they torture the conspirators in Berlin basements, one name keeps coming up. Rommel recovers consciousness in a hospital bed, into a world where he's no longer the hero of the Reich. He's become a suspect. His name is coming up in interrogations. Because he survived the crash, he's now available to be destroyed by the regime he served. But the strafing wasn't Rommel's first catastrophic error. 6 weeks earlier, he made a tactical mistake that would haunt him for the rest of his short life. June 6, 1944, D-Day. The largest amphibious invasion in human history is launching on the beaches of Normandy, and Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the commander responsible for defending those beaches, isn't there. He's in Germany, at his home in Herrlingen, giving his wife a pair of shoes for her birthday. Let that sink in. While 160,000 Allied troops are storming the beaches he's supposed to defend, Rommel is 250 miles away presenting Lucy with a birthday gift. How did this happen? Rommel had looked at the weather forecast on June 5th and decided the invasion was impossible. Storms in the Channel, high winds, poor visibility. The Allies would never launch in these conditions. So, he made a decision. He'd drive to Germany for a brief visit home, then continue to Berlin to meet with Hitler and demand more panzer divisions for the Atlantic Wall. He left France on June 5th. The Allies invaded on June 6th, and this absence was catastrophic, not because Rommel had authority over the panzer reserves. He didn't. Hitler kept that power for himself, but because Rommel's presence could have changed the urgency of the response. In our timeline, Hitler was asleep until 10 a.m. on D-Day morning, and his staff was too terrified to wake him. Field Marshal von Rundstedt requested permission to release the panzer reserves at dawn, but was denied without Hitler's approval. The panzers sat idle for 6 critical hours while the Allies established their beachhead. If Rommel had been at his headquarters, his reputation and force of personality might have pushed the staff to wake Hitler immediately, might have made the case for immediate panzer commitment more forcefully, might have organized a more effective response with the forces he did control. But even Rommel couldn't override Hitler's requirement for personal approval of panzer movements. The problem wasn't just Rommel's absence. It was a command system so centralized that nothing could happen without waking the Führer, and Rommel wasn't there to bang on the door. When he got the phone call that the invasion had started, he raced back to France, but by the time he arrived, the beachhead was secure. The moment was lost. The war in the West was effectively over. Rommel himself later wrote that June 6th was the longest day of his life, not because of the fighting, but because of his absence from it. Here's the pattern. Rommel made errors of judgment. He misjudged the weather and thought the invasion wouldn't come. He prioritized personal obligation over strategic necessity. He trusted that the system would function without him. These are the same errors he would make with the conspiracy, misjudging Hitler's ruthlessness, prioritizing his conception of honor over strategic reality, trusting that halfway measures would protect him. The birthday shoes weren't just a tactical error, they revealed a fatal flaw in how Rommel calculated risk, and that flaw would kill him 4 months later. By summer 1944, every German general faced the same choice because the war was lost, and everyone knew it. 3 positions were possible. Position 1. Total loyalty. Keep quiet, obey orders, fight until the end. Upside, you're safe from the regime. Downside, complicity in destruction and atrocity. You survive, but you have no honor. Position 2. Total resistance. Join the plot, commit to assassination, use your troops to seize control. Upside, if you win, you save Germany and end the war. Downside, if you lose, you die immediately. High risk, everything at stake. Position 3. What Rommel chose. Talk to the conspirators, discuss what comes after Hitler, but don't commit, don't participate, don't act. Stay close enough to lead if they win, distant enough to deny involvement if they lose. Hedge your bets. But Rommel had one absolute condition: no assassination. He wanted Hitler arrested and put on trial, thought making Hitler a martyr would cause civil war, wanted what he called a clean coup. He wanted the result, Hitler gone, without committing to the method murder. From a strategic perspective, this is suicide. By talking to conspirators, he crossed the line of treason. but by refusing to join he built no protection, no network, no operational security, no leverage. He accepted the risk of being a traitor without the tools of a revolutionary. That choice would destroy him. Here's the darkest part, the part usually left out. How did the Gestapo learn about Rommel? Enter General Hans Speidel. Speidel was Rommel's chief of staff, the intellectual, and unlike Rommel, he was deep in the conspiracy, one of the key organizers in the West. When the plot failed, the Gestapo arrested Speidel on September 7th and interrogated him. Now, look at the outcome. Rommel is dead. Hans Speidel survives. Not only survives the war, but in the 1950s becomes a 4-star general in the new West German army and eventually supreme commander of NATO ground forces in Central Europe. How does the main conspirator survive while his boss takes cyanide? Historians debate this. The prevailing theory: under interrogation, Speidel minimized his own role while emphasizing Rommel's involvement, trading the bigger name to save himself. Others argue the Gestapo simply couldn't prove Speidel's active participation. What's undeniable, Speidel survived and Rommel didn't. The man who held the keys to the conspiracy lived to command NATO forces while Rommel died with poison in his mouth. This shows the danger of halfway resistance. Rommel trusted Speidel, let him conduct the meetings, let him handle the network. Rommel outsourced his treason. When the hammer fell, the man holding the evidence used it to survive. Rommel built no protection, kept no insurance, created no leverage, and when the Gestapo came, he had nothing to bargain with. The halfway position left him completely exposed. But the story of Speidel's betrayal doesn't end there. After the war, Speidel would play a crucial role in reshaping how the world remembered Rommel, and that's a twist we'll come back to. The two generals Bergdorf and Maisel present the evidence. Testimony from Speidel, testimony from Caesar von Hofacker, who named Rommel under torture. Rommel argues, "I wanted him arrested, not killed." Bergdorf cuts him off. The Führer is not interested in nuances. Rommel knew what waited if he refused: the meat hooks, the cameras, the humiliation from the July executions. The cyanide was brutal, but it was private, quick, and let him die as a soldier, not a spectacle. He chooses the poison. He walks to the black car driven by SS Master Sergeant Heinrich Deuss and climbs in. Deuss drives to a quiet spot and is ordered to step away. 10 minutes later, he returns to find Rommel slumped forward, cap fallen off, baton on the floor. The cover-up required one more participant. Dr. Friedrich Breiderhoff, who examined the body, found cyanide evidence and was forced at gunpoint to write heart attack on the death certificate. He kept silent for 16 years. 4 days later, the funeral in Ulm, Nazi theatre with swastika flags, Hitler's massive wreath, eulogies praising Rommel's loyalty. In the front row sits Manfred Rommel in his Luftwaffe uniform, forced to salute his father's coffin and shake hands with his murderers. If he speaks the truth, his mother goes to the camps. The bargain was honoured. His mother received the pension. Manfred wasn't conscripted. The family survived. 7 months later, Germany surrendered. Manfred told Allied investigators the truth, and the lie unravelled. The lesson isn't about World War II. It's about the mechanics of power. In any authoritarian system, there are stable positions and unstable positions, and Rommel chose the unstable one. Halfway resistance gives the regime the perfect target. You provide a reason to kill you through disloyalty while denying yourself the means to fight back through lack of organization. When the crackdown came, Rommel had no cards to play. Couldn't call his troops because he hadn't organized them. Couldn't call the Allies because he hadn't made a deal. Couldn't call Hitler because he was already compromised. He was a threat with no leverage. And threats with no leverage get liquidated. By October, the evidence was compiled and the conspiracy was crushed. Rommel was trapped by his earlier decision to hedge. The brutal reality. In collapsing authoritarian systems, there's no middle ground. You're either loyal, actively resisting, or you're a liability to be eliminated. Halfway gets you killed. But here's where the story takes its strangest turn. Within 5 years of Rommel's death, the man who died suspected of treason became an international icon of the good German. 2 men built this myth. The first was British Brigadier Desmond Young, who'd been Rommel's prisoner in North Africa and was treated well. Young's 1950 book Rommel, the Desert Fox became an international bestseller and a Hollywood film starring James Mason. Rommel, the noble enemy, the tragic hero who resisted Hitler. The second mythmaker had darker motives, Hans Speidel. The same chief of staff who likely traded Rommel's name to save himself now wrote extensively portraying Rommel as a dedicated anti-Nazi fully committed to resistance. Speidel downplayed the halfway nature of Rommel's involvement, making him sound like an active conspirator rather than a man who wanted results without commitment. Why? Because if Rommel was a principled resistor, then Speidel, as his right-hand man, became one by association. The clean Wehrmacht myth served everyone in the 1950s. The Allies needed good Germans to rearm against the Soviets. Former officers needed to escape their pasts. The Cold War needed simple narratives. And Speidel rode Rommel's legend all the way to NATO headquarters. The man who possibly betrayed Rommel to the Gestapo became the architect of his heroic reputation, then used that reputation to command NATO forces. Speidel died in 1984, honored and decorated. Rommel died in 1944 with cyanide in his mouth. The betrayer lived to write the history. Most weren't so lucky. The system consumed its own. Bergdorf, who carried the cyanide to Rommel, ended up trapped in the Führer bunker and shot himself as Soviet forces closed in on May 2, 1945. The enforcer became another casualty. Manfred survived, carrying the weight of his father's choices into a different Germany. October 14, 1944. Rommel walks to the car and dies. The desert fox who couldn't decide between loyalty and resistance, who wanted the benefits of treason without the commitment of revolution, who thought he could negotiate with a system that only understood power. The cyanide was simply the logical conclusion of the illogical position he'd chosen months before. What do you think? Was Rommel a tragic hero or a naive enabler who got what was coming? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If you want to understand the real history behind the myths, hit subscribe because I break down the strategic decisions that shaped our world. Thanks for watching.